So Tom Parker Bowles just got physically removed from a royal estate. And the part that actually matters isn't the removal itself. It's what happened on the phone call afterward, because that's where the entire illusion Camilla has been building for years just completely collapsed in front of a room full of witnesses. Here's what happened. While King Charles was out of the country, Tom Parker Bowles walked onto the Duchy of Cornwall, which is Prince William's territory, set up a full corporate gala, plugged his catering equipment into the estate's power supply, and threw the doors open like he personally owned the place. He even put up a crest that looked almost exactly like the royal crest but wasn't, just different enough to avoid a lawsuit. Guests noticed. Some of them couldn't figure out what was off about it, and others clocked it immediately and knew exactly what they were looking at. The word that came to mind was thief. Tom had been running the scheme for a while, just on a smaller scale. He'd bring corporate sponsors onto royal properties, collect money for access, and clear everything out before anyone official showed up. A palace staff member saw it happening, wrote it all down, filed a formal complaint, and that complaint made its way to Camilla's desk. Then it disappeared, gone. The person who filed it lost their job. Tom read that situation perfectly. His mother would cover for him no matter how far he pushed it. And the senior people inside the palace who knew the full picture stayed quiet because they understood that coming after Tom meant coming after Camilla. And coming after Camilla meant fire raining down on everything you had. So they looked away. Year after year, while Tom got bolder. He started showing up at royal estate events without invitations, walking up to donors and investors, telling them he had influence over how royal properties were used. That was never true. That influence was never his to sell. But people believed him. They signed checks. They handed over money thinking Tom Parker Bowles could get them inside the monarchy. And every penny went straight to him. When people complained, those complaints went nowhere. Some of them were pressured until they stopped. The beginning of the end came when Charles and Camilla left for the United States for that state visit. The moment the plane left the ground, Tom started hosting private dinners at the duchy, quietly testing how much room he had with no one looking. Then they came back, but Charles walked straight into the Chelsea Flower Show, completely wrapped up in that massive event with Alan Titchmarsh and David Beckham. Every lens in Britain was fixed on London. Tom looked at all that noise and decided no one with any real authority was watching what he was doing out in the countryside. That's when he planned the gala. William's office had the report within days, but William was in the middle of something delicate. He was deep in private talks with Charles about reshaping and modernizing the Crown Estate, conversations built entirely on trust. If William had shown up personally to remove Camilla's son from the property, it would have become the loudest royal story in years and destroyed everything he'd spent months building with his father. So he made a smarter move. He called Prince Edward and handed over every legal right he held over the duchy, full administrative authority, the power to act without delay. He placed the entire weight of the Prince of Wales behind every decision Edward was about to make. Edward had spent his whole life watching this institution twist itself into shapes it was never meant to hold just to keep one entitled man comfortable, a man who had never given a single day of actual service to any of it. When William put that power in his hands, he did not hesitate. The night of the gala, rain was hammering down outside. Inside the hall, Tom was gliding between his investors, holding a glass of wine, completely at ease, like a man who believes this is his house because, as far as he's concerned, it is. Then Edward walked in and the whole room seized its breath, everyone except Tom, because Tom had no idea that Edward's men had already arrived before him. They went directly to the kitchens before a single person in that room registered what was unfolding. Power connections were being cut one by one. Equipment was being pulled free and logged. Kitchen staff were being told to walk away from their stations. The whole thing was already in motion by the time Tom looked up and saw Edward standing there, perfectly still, watching him. Tom knew the moment he saw him that this was not going to be good. And what did he do with that knowledge? He squared his shoulders, raised his champagne glass, smiled, and walked straight over. "You have no right to be here," he said, loud enough to carry across the room. "This event runs under the direct authority of the Queen of England." He said it with a grin that told everyone watching he was enjoying this. Edward said nothing. That silence hit Tom harder than any words could have. Tom had never liked Edward. He thought Edward was too stiff, too proper, too comfortable playing by rules that Tom had never respected. He thought Edward was boring and irrelevant. And now he had a full audience and years of that contempt sitting right behind his teeth. Something in him must have known he was about to go too far. But he couldn't stop himself. He looked Edward square in the face and said, "You know what? You are a ghost with a title. A man whose name means so little it cannot even open a door." He waved his arm across the room, making sure every guest was watching, making sure every eye was on the moment. "William sent you, didn't he? Couldn't be bothered to show up himself, so he sent his uncle to do it, because that is all you are, somebody's errand boy in an expensive coat." Edward still said nothing, and that silence gave Tom everything he needed to keep going. He told Edward that his whole generation was finished, that real power now belonged to people who understood the modern world, not men who inherited a title and called it relevance. And then he said the thing that made every single person in that room go quiet. He said the Parker Bowles family was the future of this institution, that people like him, people with connections, with influence, with a real place in today's world, were the people this monarchy actually needed. Not old men who had already been pushed to the edges and just hadn't accepted it yet. He looked straight at Edward the whole time he said it. He wanted Edward to feel every single word. Edward let him finish. Then he spoke. His voice was so low and so level that the people standing furthest from him leaned in just to catch it. He told Tom that he had no right whatsoever to host a gala there. This land belonged to the Prince of Wales. He made it clear that Camilla was not the authority on these grounds, that her name, her position, her blessing counted for nothing there. Every person in that room understood exactly what he was not saying out loud. Tom Parker Bowles was nobody here. Then he told Tom he had 60 minutes. 60 minutes to remove every piece of his equipment and every person he had brought onto the property. Anyone still standing on that land when the hour ran out would be arrested for criminal trespass on sovereign ground. He held eye contact with Tom until the message landed, then turned and gave his men the nod, and they got to work immediately. The kitchen power died first. Catering staff stood in sudden darkness, hands at their sides. Wine crates were carried out the door. The version of the royal crest Tom had mounted on the wall like a trophy was stripped off and removed. Guests sat exactly where they were and watched, and not one of them made a sound. Tom's face had gone deep red. He grabbed his assistant by the arm, whispered something sharp into his ear, and within 2 minutes a call was going through. It was Camilla. Her voice came through hard and furious. She ordered Edward to stand down immediately. She would not have her son dragged through a public humiliation. She would take it to the king personally, handle it inside the family, and none of this heavy-handed intervention was necessary or welcome. Edward reached out, took the phone from his aide's hand, and ended the call while she was still speaking. Every jaw in the room dropped. The room had just watched the Queen of England get cut off. And Tom Parker Bowles, standing in the ruins of his own gala, understood completely in that moment that no rescue was coming. The only thing left was to get out, and get out now. He did not go quietly. Nobody who knows him would expect him to. As the estate warden steered him toward the exit, he started screaming. He said Charles had never truly been a king, that he was a man who spent 40 years standing in a corridor and was now spending his reign being quietly managed by his own son. He called William controlling and suspicious, a man so consumed by protecting his future throne that he was tearing his own blood apart over it. He called Edward a hired hand, a man too hollow for his own fights, loaned out like a piece of equipment. Then came the threats. He said he had been in rooms where conversations happened that were never meant to be heard. He knew things about the king, about Harry, whom Tom called the foolish son who ran away and left everything behind, about William, about Kate, whom he called pretentious by name right there in front of witnesses. He said he had enough on all of them to rip this family open in front of the whole world. And if this was the war they wanted, they should be very certain they knew what it was going to cost them. He was still screaming when one of the wardens shut the door on him. Behind that door, not one person in that room had moved to help him. Not a single guest who ate his food and drank his wine and used his name to get into that room took even one step toward him. Some of them looked genuinely stunned. What had possessed this man to stand there and go after the entire royal family by name? This is the part where the story really shifts, because what happened next with Camilla revealed something that had been carefully hidden for years. After Tom was removed, Camilla's anger hit a different level entirely. She called Edward back and was not quiet about it. She ordered him to stop everything immediately. She told him the event fell under her personal authority as queen consort and that he had no standing to override her. This was a private family matter and she would deal with it directly with the king. Edward let her speak. Then he said, completely quietly, that what was happening was the execution of a direct order from the Prince of Wales. That her authority as queen consort did not reach sovereign land held in constitutional trust by the direct line of succession. If she believed she had the standing to overrule William's legal authority over the duchy, she was welcome to make that argument formally, on the record, in writing, for everyone to see. He said it knowing she had nothing. He said it to let her understand that he understood that too. Then he said, "Do your worst, and we will all find out very quickly where the power in this family actually lives." Silence followed. And then something in Camilla's voice shifted completely. The command drained out of it. The threat went with it. What was left was something much smaller, something stripped bare. She began to talk about Tom's future, about what a criminal record and formal charges would do to her son's life going forward. Her voice had completely fallen away from everything a queen sounds like. She was not the queen consort in that moment. She was a mother. She asked Edward to let the charges go, to keep it away from any official record, to let the removal be the end of it and not follow her son into the rest of his life. She was pleading with him to spare her son. Edward listened to enough of it to know exactly what he was hearing. Then he ended the call mid-sentence, mid-plea. The people sitting in that room were not palace staff who could be quietly told to forget what they heard. These were some of the most powerful people in London, people who had built their entire lives on knowing things before anyone else and making sure that knowledge reached the right ears. Camilla's voice breaking on that phone call was not going to stay in that pavilion. It was going to be running through London before the sun came up, and there was not a single thing she could do to stop it. Because here's what that phone call actually exposed about Camilla's power. It was never built on anything that could hold weight on its own. It was built on Charles loving her. It was built on everyone around her being too afraid of how close she was to the king to ever push back. The moment William chose to move, every single piece of it collapsed, because William's authority over the duchy is legal, it is constitutional. When she began to beg, she told the whole room that she knew that too. What Edward carried away from that call was something he would never forget. He now knew what Camilla had spent years making sure no one ever saw, that her power is performance. Strip away the title. Move Charles out of the frame. Put her in a corner where the future king has already acted, and there is nothing underneath. Just a woman on a phone line begging someone to stay on with her. William, meanwhile, had already known about all of this. He had already called for a full audit, and the result was devastating. The duchy was losing hundreds of thousands of pounds because Tom had been running private commercial events on the land and pocketing every cent. His equipment had chewed through heritage buildings that had survived for centuries. His team had punched gaps in the